The evening had started like any other. The sun was dipping low, spilling golden light across the small town, brushing the edges of the streets and turning the windows of the little restaurant into warm squares of light. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and old wood, and the quiet hum of the refrigerator mixed with the soft clink of cutlery. The restaurant wasn't full, not yet. Only a few tables were occupied, couples talking softly. A man with a newspaper in front of him, an elderly woman sipping tea alone. The waitress moved quickly, her shoes making a soft shuffle across the wooden floor. Her uniform was neat but worn at the edges, showing the countless shifts she had worked in this place. There was a weariness in the set of her shoulders, quiet heaviness in the way she walked, but her movements were precise, practiced, and careful. She had learned to carry this weight without letting it show. To most people, she was just a face in the crowd, a background presence, someone who existed only to take orders, bring food, refill water, and smile politely. But she carried her own story, a story no one at this restaurant could even guess. The evening started slowly. A few regulars came in, greeted her with nods, small smiles, but nothing more. She knew most of their routines by heart. The man by the window always ordered the same sandwich and black coffee. The elderly woman always had chamomile tea and a piece of lemon cake. She moved from table to table, her mind racing faster than her feet, thinking about the bills she had to pay, the quiet ache in her back, and the loneliness that had been a constant companion for years. She pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the orders, the food, the polite smiles. It was easier that way. In the corner of the restaurant near the window stood an old piano. Its surface was scratched, the varnish fading, the keys slightly yellowed with age. Most people barely noticed it. Some even thought it was part of the decor, a nostalgic touch that nobody had bothered to play for years. To her, though, it meant something entirely different. Every time she passed it, she felt a strange pull in her chest. It wasn't just a piano. It was a reminder of another time, another life, a life where music had meant freedom, hope, and escape. She hadn't touched it in years, not since life had become too heavy and unforgiving. Not since the dreams she had once held had slowly slipped through her fingers. She refilled a glass of water. For the man at the window, smiling politely as he mumbled a quiet thanks, his eyes never leaving the pages of the newspaper. She moved toward the elderly woman's table, carefully lifting the teapot and pouring it into her cup. The woman's eyes met hers, kind but tired, and for a moment, the waitress felt the small sting of connection, fleeting and fragile. Most of her interactions were like this, brief, polite, without depth, without anyone really noticing her, and she had grown used to it. The evening grew darker, and more people started to come in. A group of young friends laughed at a table near the entrance, their voices loud and energetic, filling the small room with life. A couple sat near the piano, their heads bent together over menus, whispering softly, oblivious to everything else. The waitress moved between the tables, taking orders, serving plates, clearing dishes, her mind on autopilot. She kept her movements fluid, efficient, but inside, there was a quiet storm. She felt the weight of everything pressing down, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the sense that life was just passing by while she barely managed to keep up. She paused near the piano, just for a moment, her hand brushing the edge of the wood. It felt cold and smooth under her fingers, and a rush of memories came back all at once. She remembered her mother teaching her to play, sitting together in a small, sunlit room. The joy of creating music filling every corner of her childhood. She remembered the first time she performed in front of people, the applause, the pride, the thrill of being seen and appreciated. And then she remembered how life had changed, how the piano had become silent, and how she had learned to push her dreams aside for survival, for bills, for responsibilities that never ended. The smell of coffee brought her back to the present. A customer called for her, and she moved quickly, hiding the wistful look in her eyes. She placed a plate in front of a young man who smiled politely and then buried himself in his phone. The group of friends laughed louder, one of them spilling a drink, and she rushed to clean it up, her hands moving with practiced precision, heart racing with the effort to stay composed. She didn't allow herself to think about the piano anymore, not yet. There was work to do, responsibilities to meet. And she had learned long ago that life didn't wait for dreams. As the night progressed, the restaurant slowly filled up. The clatter of dishes, the low hum of conversation, the occasional laugh, and the quiet sighs of tired customers created a rhythm she had learned to navigate without effort. But despite the activity, the corners of the room, especially near the piano, remained strangely calm. It was as if that corner existed in a separate world, untouched by the noise and movement, a silent witness to everything that was happening. She glanced at it again while passing, feeling the old tug at her heart. She took a deep breath and moved on. A new customer arrived, an older man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He sat at a table near the piano, placing a small notebook in front of him. She noticed him noticing the piano, a small spark of recognition in his eyes. She served him water, careful to maintain her polite smile, but inside she felt something shift. The piano had always been her secret companion, a reminder of who she once was. But now she realized that someone else might notice it too. She shook her head slightly, dismissing the thought. She had no time for fantasies, no room for hope. Life was work, and work alone. The kitchen bell rang, signaling another order ready to go out. She moved to pick it up, her hands steady, her mind focused, but the tug in her chest remained. She remembered late nights practicing piano, feeling the music flow through her like water, washing away fear and sorrow. She remembered the applause, the bright eyes of strangers moved by something she had created. And for a moment, she allowed herself to breathe in that memory. But then a child at a nearby table dropped his fork, and she was back in the present, kneeling to help him pick it up. Smiling through the tension that always seemed to settle in her shoulders, the night wore on. The restaurant slowly emptied. The group of friends left, laughing and noisy. The elderly woman finished her tea and waved goodbye, and the man with the newspaper quietly slipped out the door. She cleared the last few tables, washing dishes, wiping counters, making sure everything was in order for the next day. The room was quiet now, bathed in the soft glow of the overhead lights. Only the piano remained in the corner, silent. Waiting, she walked past it one more time, her hand brushing the keys, feeling the cold smoothness under her fingers. A memory of a melody came to her, one she hadn't played in years, one that had once made her feel alive, seen, and free. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound echo in her mind, letting herself remember the joy that had once existed in her life. It was a dangerous feeling, one that she hadn't allowed herself in a long time, but it was impossible to resist. For the first time that night, she paused. She sat on the small bench in front of the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. She didn't play yet, not really, but the moment was electric, full of possibility. The room was empty now, save for the piano, the memories, and her. She felt the weight of years lift slightly. The heaviness in her chest giving way to something fragile, something hopeful. She took a deep breath and allowed her fingers to press a single note. The sound rang out, clear and bright, filling the empty room in a way that startled even her. It was a small sound, but it carried everything she had buried for so long. Hope, longing, pain, and love. She closed her eyes and let herself feel it, letting the music flow through her. Even if just for a moment, the night outside was silent. The streets were empty, the town asleep, but inside the little restaurant, something had shifted. She felt it deep in her bones, a whisper of something she had forgotten, that she could still create, still touch lives, still be seen. The piano waited, patient and silent, and she realized that maybe, just maybe, it was not too late. And with that, she sat a little straighter, her fingers trembling slightly as she prepared to play again. She didn't know what would happen next, or if anyone would ever hear her, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that the music might just change everything. The first note had barely faded when she realized how long it had been since she had let herself play. The sound lingered in the quiet restaurant, wrapping around the walls and settling on the empty tables. She pressed her fingers gently on the next keys, unsure, almost afraid, but there was a soft thrill in the air. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in years' possibility. The piano was no longer just a forgotten instrument in the corner. It was a bridge back to herself, to a part of her life she had buried under the weight of work, bills, and responsibilities. She hesitated again, listening to the soft echoes of the notes she had played. Memories came rushing back. She remembered evenings when the world had felt endless and alive, when her fingers had danced on ivory keys without a thought of time or consequence. Music had been a friend, a confidant, a way to speak when words weren't enough. But life had a way of pressing down, of making people forget their passions, and she had let the piano fall silent for years. Now, sitting there, she realized how much she had missed it. How much she had missed being herself. The old man who had arrived earlier remained at his table, scribbling something in his small notebook. She had barely noticed him, too caught up in the flood of memories and the first fragile notes she had dared to play. He looked up briefly, watching her, and gave a faint nod of encouragement before returning to his writing. His presence felt strange, like a quiet audience, silent but attentive. She wasn't used to attention anymore, not in the way that mattered, and it made her stomach twist in nervous anticipation. She pressed another key, letting the sound fill the air. It was a small, simple melody at first, nothing complicated, just enough to remind herself of what she could do. Her fingers remembered more than her mind did. Notes she hadn't played in years came naturally, as if they had been waiting for her all along. She leaned into the music, allowing it to take her somewhere far away from dishes, tables, and orders. For a moment, the restaurant didn't exist. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She wasn't someone struggling to make ends meet. She was simply a person who could create, who could express, who could feel. The memories didn't stop. She thought about the first time she had performed for an audience. The way her hands had trembled, the thrill of seeing faces light up with something she had made. She remembered her mother sitting in the back of that small recital hall, clapping the loudest, her eyes full of pride. Those moments had been fleeting, but they had mattered. And now, sitting in this quiet little restaurant, she felt that spark again. The piano didn't just play music. It played her story, her joys, her sorrows, her hidden dreams. Outside, the night deepened. Streetlights flickered on, painting the empty roads in soft pools of yellow light. Inside, the restaurant was quiet except for her music. She didn't notice when the door opened, or when a few late diners wandered in. Her world had narrowed down to the piano, the keys, and the sound she coaxed from them. The rhythm she created was slow and deliberate, reflective and tender. It was not a performance, not yet. It was a reconnection, a reclamation of something she thought she had lost forever. The few people in the restaurant began to notice the sound. The couple sitting near the piano paused in their conversation, glancing up from their menus. The elderly woman at the corner table lifted her head, a faint smile appearing as she listened. Even the young man at the window lowered his newspaper, eyebrows raised in surprise. The notes were not perfect, not polished like a concert pianist, but they were real, raw, and full of feeling. And that was enough. It caught people's attention in a way that no forced charm or polite service ever could. She allowed herself a small smile, though she didn't look at anyone directly. Music had always been her secret language, a way to express what words could never reach. Tonight, though, she realized it wasn't just for her. It was a gift, a quiet offering to anyone willing to listen. Each note carried something of her life, her struggles, her dreams, her hidden strength. She pressed her hands on the keys, letting the sounds flow naturally. Without thought, without hesitation, trusting her instincts and the memories that had guided her fingers so far, a soft tear escaped her eye. Quickly brushed away, unnoticed by the few diners who were quietly paying attention. She didn't stop. The melody grew richer, more confident, more alive. Her back straightened, her shoulders lifted slightly. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of power in her own abilities. The piano wasn't just an object in the corner anymore. It was a part of her identity, a reminder that she was more than a waitress, more than someone simply serving tables. She was capable, she was talented, and she still had something to give the world. The elderly woman's smile widened, and the man who had been writing in his notebook set it aside, his eyes soft and attentive. They didn't speak. They didn't clap. They simply listened, absorbing the music, feeling its sincerity. It was not flashy or showy. It did not demand attention, but it commanded it all the same, quietly, effortlessly, by the mere truth of its presence. She was speaking her truth, and they were listening. That realization brought a warmth to her chest, a feeling that she hadn't known she had missed so deeply. She let her mind wander to the past, remembering her lessons, her teacher's kind but strict instructions. The hours spent perfecting scales, the joy of finally mastering a difficult piece. She had given up that life, pushed it aside for practicality, but it had never truly left her. The piano waited, patient and silent, ready to welcome her back whenever she was ready to return. And now, after all these years, she was ready. Her hands moved more confidently, more fluidly, each note ringing clear and true. Carrying all of the emotions she had kept locked inside for so long, the restaurant began to take on a different atmosphere. It was subtle at first. Conversations hushed, forks paused midair, and eyes turned instinctively toward the corner. The music was not loud or overbearing, but it filled the space in a way that demanded attention. Even the clinking of dishes and the soft hum of conversation faded into the background, placed by the soft, steady flow of her playing. For a few moments, time seemed to stop. The room, the people, the worries, they all existed only as shadows around the music. Secondary to the story being told through her hands, she felt a tremor of nervousness. Part of her wanted to stop, to return to the safety of being invisible, to hide behind her uniform and her duties. But the sound had a life of its own now. It wanted to continue, and she wanted it too. She let herself be carried by the melody, letting go of fear, embarrassment, and doubt. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to be seen not with words or actions, but through the honesty of her music. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The young couple near the piano had moved slightly, their heads turning fully toward her now. They watched her, intrigued, impressed, a quiet awe in their expressions. The elderly woman had tears in her eyes, subtle but unmistakable. Even the young man at the window had lowered his phone, leaning forward slightly, drawn into the spell of the notes. She realized that she had a power she hadn't acknowledged in a long time. She could move people, touch hearts, and create a moment that mattered. Even in a small restaurant in a quiet town, her fingers danced lightly across the keys, experimenting with soft variations, gentle flourishes, and subtle changes in rhythm. The melody grew more complex, layered with emotion and meaning. Each note carried her history, her regrets, her hopes, and her quiet resilience. She remembered nights when she had doubted herself, nights when the world had seemed too harsh, too cruel, and she had thought her talent meaningless. But now, in this small, unassuming space, she saw that it had value. Her music had value. She had value. The old man, who had been writing in his notebook for most of the night, finally closed it, resting his hands on the table. He watched her with a faint, approving smile. There was something in his gaze that felt almost like recognition, as if he understood the long silence, the lost years, and the courage it took to return to this instrument. She noticed him briefly, and for a moment, she imagined speaking, explaining everything, sharing her story in words. But she didn't need to. The music said it all. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. She played not for applause, not for recognition, but because she had to. The sound was necessary, a part of her own survival, a reclaiming of something essential. The restaurant, usually so ordinary, so predictable, had transformed into a space of quiet wonder, a place where people could feel more than they usually did. The piano, the worn old bench, the tired waitress, together, they created something magical. She let the final notes hang in the air, soft and trembling, and for a long moment the room was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, a soft clap began. One person, then another, until the small restaurant was filled with quiet applause, tentative but genuine. She stood up breathless, her hands shaking slightly, and allowed herself a small, shy smile. For the first time in years, she felt seen, appreciated, and alive in a way she hadn't thought possible. The old man gave her a nod and a small wave of his hand, a simple acknowledgement that said more than words ever could. The couple at the piano leaned closer together, whispering quietly, still in awe. The elderly woman dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, smiling warmly, and somewhere deep inside her, the waitress felt a spark of hope, a small, fragile flame that she hadn't felt in years. The piano had not only returned her to herself, it had reminded her that life still held moments of beauty, wonder, and connection. The soft applause had barely faded when she realized something had changed inside her. That first acknowledgement had been enough to ignite a feeling she had long thought lost. She looked at the piano, its old, scratched surface gleaming under the warm lights of the restaurant, and she knew she could not stop now. She had come this far, and every note she played made her feel more alive, more herself, more connected to the world around her. Tonight, the piano would not remain silent. Not anymore. She sat back down, her fingers trembling slightly as she rested them on the keys. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment to center herself. The quiet of the room had shifted. The atmosphere was electric in a subtle, almost invisible way. People who had been quietly finishing their meals now leaned forward slightly in their chairs. Conversations had stopped altogether. Even the sound of a fork tapping against a plate felt intrusive in comparison to the music she was about to create. She could feel the weight of their attention, yet it did not scare her. Instead, it gave her courage. She began slowly, letting her hands move with the memory of countless hours of practice and the echo of old melodies. This time the music was stronger, more confident. Each note carried more than sound. It carried emotion, telling a story without words. The room seemed to listen, not just with ears, but with something deeper. A quiet attentiveness that wrapped around her like a warm, invisible blanket. She played with a rhythm that was both steady and flowing, each chord connecting to the next. Creating a web of sound that filled the space in ways words could not. The couple near the piano leaned closer together, their conversation forgotten. The man at the window stopped scrolling on his phone, his eyes wide and focused, and the elderly woman gently rested her hands on the table, tears glistening in the corner of her eyes. The young group that had come in earlier for a late meal had quieted completely. Drawn in by the music as if by some magnetic force, no one had spoken a word, yet the entire room seemed alive in a new way. Awakened by the melody that flowed effortlessly from her hands, her fingers moved faster now, dancing across the keys with a fluidity she had not felt in years. Each chord was precise but not rigid, filled with subtle variations that gave the music depth and texture. She remembered lessons from her childhood, the disciplined practice sessions that had seemed tedious at the time, but had now become the foundation of everything she was doing. Her music was not perfect in a technical sense, but it was perfect in its truth, in its honesty, in the way it conveyed a lifetime of experiences, hopes and heartbreaks. As she continued, the room began to feel smaller, as if it had been transformed by the music. The tables and chairs, the plates and cups, even the walls seemed to recede, leaving only her, the piano, and the people who were silently witnessing this transformation. The melody swelled, carrying with it a sense of longing, sense of journey, of someone who had endured hardship but had never lost the essence of who they were. Her own chest ached with the emotions that she was channeling, a mixture of pain, joy, regret, and hope all intertwined in the sound that spilled from the piano. The old man who had been quietly observing from his table finally stood, carefully moving closer to the piano without disturbing anyone else. He did not speak, did not interrupt, but his presence seemed to offer a quiet affirmation, a silent encouragement that gave her strength. She noticed him briefly, feeling a connection, a recognition that transcended words. For a moment, she imagined herself performing not in secret, not for herself alone, but for people who truly understood the meaning behind the music. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Outside, the night pressed in, the world continuing, unaware of the transformation inside the restaurant. The warm glow of the lights spilled onto the empty streets, and the occasional distant car passed by, oblivious to the story unfolding within these walls. But inside, the air was thick with the weight of attention, with anticipation, and with the sheer presence of something beautiful and fragile being created in real time. Her hands moved faster, yet with control, coaxing out notes that rose and fell like waves, carrying with them stories of the past, echoes of her youth, and the resilience she had cultivated over the years. A small group of late diners, initially drawn in by curiosity, now sat frozen in their seats, completely absorbed. They whispered nothing, for fear of breaking the spell. One woman clutched her napkin, unable to hide the shiver that ran down her spine. A man absent-mindedly wiped his glasses, only to stop and stare, mesmerized. Even the young couple, usually distracted by phones and conversation, had stopped moving entirely. Every person in the room was connected, if only for a moment, through the sound she created. It was a communion of sorts, silent yet intimate, shared experience that none of them would forget. She paused briefly, letting a chord hang in the air, vibrating with tension and expectation. Her chest heaved slightly, the adrenaline mixing with a deep, calming satisfaction. She realized that this was more than just playing music. This was storytelling. Every note, every pause, every deliberate touch of the keys was a word, a sentence, a chapter of her life. She had been invisible for so long, overlooked and underestimated, but here, in this small, quiet restaurant, she was visible. She was heard, and that visibility, that acknowledgement of her existence, felt more powerful than anything she had experienced in years. Then, almost without thinking, she began a faster, more lively section. Her fingers flew across the keys, creating a rhythm that was both urgent and jubilant. The music shifted, capturing the complexity of her emotions, the frustration of years of struggle, the joy of rediscovery, the bittersweet memory of dreams postponed, and the undeniable hope that still burned within her. The room responded almost instinctively. The diners leaned forward, their breaths caught in anticipation, their eyes tracking every movement of her hands. Even the old man's notebook lay forgotten on the table as he silently witnessed the performance. Her confidence grew with every passing note. She no longer felt the fear that had gripped her when she first touched the piano. Instead, she felt a sense of mastery, of purpose. She realized that the music was no longer just a personal escape. It was a bridge to others, a way to connect, to communicate, to share something that transcended words. She had always known that music could move people. But experiencing it firsthand, watching strangers react with genuine emotion, was a revelation. It made her feel powerful and humble at the same time, a strange and wonderful combination. A subtle shift occurred in the room. The background noise, the clinking of dishes, the hum of conversation, the soft scraping of chairs faded completely. The entire restaurant became a single entity, united by the sound that emanated from her fingertips. People forgot their hunger, their worries, their tiredness. They forgot the world outside. There was only the music, the pianist, and the unspoken connection that bound them together for these fleeting minutes. It was rare, this kind of magic, and she felt privileged to create it, to witness it, to be a part of it. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment. She noticed the expressions around her, eyes glistening, mouth slightly open in awe, fingers gripping table edges as if holding on to the moment. She caught herself smiling, a quiet, almost shy smile, but it was genuine. This was real. She had feared judgment, rejection, ridicule, but none of it came. Only understanding, only connection. And with each passing note, she felt a deep sense of release, as if years of stress, fear, and self-doubt were being lifted note by note. Chord by chord, the piano itself seemed to respond. Its age would resonating in harmony with her emotions. She pressed harder on certain keys, softer on others, experimenting with tone and volume. She allowed herself to improvise, to let her instincts guide her, and in doing so, she discovered something she had not realized she still possessed, creativity that had lain dormant, waiting patiently for the moment she was ready, and now she was ready. The music grew richer, more layered, more expressive. It told a story that no one could articulate in words, yet everyone felt it deeply. Somewhere near the back, a small child clutched a parent's hand, wide-eyed, sensing something extraordinary. The young couple moved slightly, almost leaning toward her as if to catch every subtle nuance. Even the elderly woman, whose life experience had taught her to expect little excitement in ordinary places, looked like she'd been transported somewhere else, carried away by the sound. And the waitress, she was no longer just serving tables. She was performing not for fame or applause, but for the undeniable human need to be seen, heard, and understood. She played on her body, fully engaged, leaning into the piano, letting the music flow through her. Time seemed to stretch and bend. She lost track of minutes, hours, or any sense of routine. All that existed was the melody, the resonance, and the fragile, astonishing connection she had formed with everyone in the room. Her heart swelled with gratitude and surprise. She'd never imagined that she would feel this alive, that she could touch so many hearts in such a simple, profound way. Then, as the last notes lingered, fading into silence, she paused. The room held its breath. No one moved immediately. It was a silence that spoke volumes, filled with awe, shock, and deep appreciation. For a moment, the waitress wondered if anyone would react at all. And then, slowly, softly, a single clap broke the quiet. One hand, then another. The sound grew, filling the room, hesitant at first, then more confident, until it became a wave of applause that surrounded her, lifting her from the stillness of the music into a shared recognition of something extraordinary. Her chest heaved, and she stood, her hands still lingering near the piano keys. She looked around, seeing faces glowing with emotion, eyes shining with a mixture of surprise, admiration, and gratitude. The old man gave a gentle nod. The elderly woman smiled warmly. The young couple exchanged awed glances, and even the staff in the back peeked in, drawn by the unexpected, breathtaking performance. She had done more than play music. She had transformed the space, changed the mood, and most importantly, reminded herself and everyone present of the beauty and power of authentic expression. She stepped back from the piano, letting the silence settle once more, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something she had forgotten existed: pride. Not arrogance, not showiness, but the quiet, steady pride of someone who had reclaimed a piece of herself, who had faced fear and doubt and emerged with courage and honesty. The piano, the old dusty piano in the corner, had been her ally, her witness, her companion. And now, it had helped her create a moment that would remain with everyone in the room for years to come. The applause had barely started to fade when she realized the entire room was watching her differently. The energy had shifted completely. It was no longer a quiet restaurant with diners passing the time over dinner. It had become a space of awe and attention, as if her music had lifted the walls and allowed something extraordinary to fill the room. Her heart raced, not with fear this time, but with a strange mixture of excitement and disbelief. She had played for herself before, hidden in the quiet of empty rooms. But this was different. This was alive, real, and tangible. Her fingers hovered over the piano keys again, instinctively drawn back to the melody that had captivated everyone. She didn't know if she should continue, afraid of overstepping, afraid of losing the fragile connection she had just formed. Yet something inside her stirred. A quiet voice whispered that she had earned this moment, that she had the right to claim it fully, to let the music speak in its entirety. She pressed down gently, and the notes began again, slow at first, then building in confidence, swelling like a tide that could not be stopped. The diners had stopped eating entirely. Conversations, which had briefly resumed after her initial notes, were gone. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, every face holding an expression of amazement and something deeper recognition of the raw honesty and emotion in her playing. She noticed the elderly woman at the corner table, tears rolling slowly down her cheeks, a quiet smile forming on her lips. The young couple near the piano had moved closer together, almost leaning in to catch every nuance, and the man with the notebook had set it aside entirely. Absorbed in the sound and in the presence of something rare and beautiful, she played with more emotion now, letting the memories of her past wash through her fingers. She remembered the times she had been laughed at, ignored, or dismissed because of her quiet demeanor. Her shy nature, or the simple fact that she worked in a small restaurant rather than performing on a stage. All those experiences, all that pain and doubt poured into the music. Every note carried her story, every chord told a piece of her life, and the room responded. She could feel it, a subtle tension and release as the audience leaned forward, holding their breath, completely caught in the moment. The piano, old and worn, seemed to respond to her touch. The keys had a depth and resonance that she had forgotten existed. They vibrated with her emotions, amplifying her feelings and spreading them across the room. She pressed harder at certain moments, softer at others, experimenting, improvising, allowing instinct and memory to guide her. She no longer cared about perfection. She cared about truth, and in that truth, the music soared. Her body moved slightly with each chord, a dance of emotion and sound, as if the music itself had taken control, leading her to places she hadn't dared to go in years. The patrons were no longer just watching, they were participating, silently, emotionally, spiritually. A young child at the back sat, with eyes wide, barely blinking, fingers clutching the edge of the table. A couple of older men leaned forward, arms resting lightly on the table, faces softened with unexpected emotion. Even the staff, who had been peeking from the kitchen, quietly stood in the background, unable to tear their eyes away. Every person in the room, regardless of age or background, was connected by the music she was creating. It was as if the piano had become a vessel, channeling feelings they couldn't articulate. Uniting them all in silent understanding, she allowed herself to pause briefly. The notes lingering in the air, soft but insistent. The quiet was heavy with anticipation. She could feel the power of the moment pressing down gently, urging her forward. She leaned closer to the keys, pressing them with more deliberate intent. A new section of the melody emerged, more complex, more layered. It spoke of struggle, of resilience, of hope that had been buried beneath years of hardship. She imagined the people in the room, picturing them feeling the music as she had felt it when she was alone in her childhood home. The piano always nearby, always listening, always waiting. Her emotions surged. She remembered the nights spent practicing tirelessly, the hours when she had doubted herself, the moments when life had felt impossibly heavy. All of it poured into her fingertips, shaping the music, guiding her hands. She no longer felt the hesitation that had gripped her when she first returned to the piano. Now, every movement, every chord was intentional, a statement of existence, of resilience, of the quiet power that comes from refusing to give up on oneself. The music was no longer just sound, it was life, breathing and pulsing through the room. Touching everyone present, the couple near the piano leaned closer still, their eyes wide, holding each other as if to absorb every detail. The young child clutched the parent's hand, tears welling in her eyes. The elderly woman dabbed at her own cheeks, a quiet, grateful smile on her face. Even the man with the notebook looked shaken, moved in a way that surprised him. The waitress noticed these reactions, and for a brief moment, she felt a deep vulnerability. She realized that she was exposing herself, not just her talent, but her life, her struggles, and her deepest emotions through this music. And yet there was no fear, only trust, to trust that the music would be received, understood, and felt. She shifted the rhythm subtly, allowing the melody to flow in unexpected directions. The notes rose and fell like waves, gentle at times, powerful at others. The room seemed to respond instinctively, the diners leaning in, holding their breath, caught in the ebb and flow of emotion. It was a delicate balance, an unspoken dialogue between her and the audience, mediated entirely by the piano. She felt a thrill at the realization that she could communicate so deeply without a single word, that she could share her life, her soul, and her story purely through music. A sudden thought struck her. This could be a turning point. She could no longer see herself as just a waitress, invisible and overlooked. She had something rare, something worth sharing. Yet, she also knew the fragility of the moment. One wrong note, one falter could break the spell. She pressed on carefully, allowing her instincts to guide her, letting her emotions dictate the tempo and intensity. Each chord, each flourish was deliberate, a message to the world that she existed, that she mattered, and that her voice through the piano, was important. The silence between the notes was as powerful as the notes themselves. Each pause hung in the air, filled with tension and anticipation. She allowed herself to feel it, to revel in the weight of the moment, to acknowledge the impact her music was having. The diners did not speak, did not move, did not blink in any hurry. They were entranced, suspended in a world created by sound and emotion, a world that she had summoned into existence alone. For the first time in years, she felt fully alive, fully present, and fully capable of creating something extraordinary. As the melody progressed, she let herself improvise, weaving in fragments of memories of songs she had loved, of feelings she had long buried. The music became a tapestry, complex yet simple, rich yet delicate. Her fingers moved with confidence, guided by instinct and memory, crafting a story that transcended words. She felt tears welling in her eyes again, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of the moment. She was sharing her soul, and it was being received. The realization was both humbling and exhilarating. The audience was silent, yet the silence was alive. It was not empty. It was full of emotion, of attention, of presence. Every face in the room reflected the impact of her music. Wonder, awe, appreciation, and a quiet, unspoken connection. She could feel the energy radiating toward her, and it strengthened her resolve. She played louder, then softer, faster, then slower, experimenting, exploring, and expressing every facet of her emotions. She no longer worried about mistakes. Each note, each chord, each pause was perfect because it was hers, because it was honest, because it carried truth. She imagined her life in the past years. All the work, all the moments of invisibility, all the nights of quiet desperation. All of it had led to this moment, had prepared her to take this piano and speak without words. And now, as she played, she felt a transformation occurring not just within herself, but in the room. People were no longer merely observers, they were participants in her story, sharing in the experience, connected through something intangible yet undeniable. The final section of the piece approached, and she allowed herself to let go fully. Her hands flew across the keys, more fluidly than ever before, creating a crescendo that filled every corner of the restaurant. The sound swelled and roared, powerful yet intimate, reaching deep into the hearts of everyone present. She felt her own heart racing, chest swelling with emotion, tears freely falling now, mixing with the exhilaration and joy that coursed through her. She had never felt so alive, so seen, so validated then, as the last note rang out. She let her hands fall softly onto the keys, letting the sound fade naturally. The room held its breath for a moment, suspended in stunned silence. And then it happened, the reaction she had not dared to imagine. Clapping began slowly, hesitantly, one person after another. It grew quickly, a wave of appreciation and amazement, filling the restaurant with a joyous, infectious energy. People rose from their seats, some cheering, some wiping tears, all united in the shared experience of witnessing something rare and beautiful. She stood, shaking slightly, her hands still trembling from the intensity of the performance. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the faces of people whose lives had been quietly touched by her music. The elderly woman smiled through tears. The young couple exchanged awestruck glances. The man with the notebook gave her a subtle, approving nod. And even the staff in the kitchen peeked in, unable to hide their amazement. She had not only played music, she had created a moment that would linger in the hearts of everyone present for years to come. The clapping continued, slowly fading into a quiet hum of appreciation as she stepped away from the piano. Her hands still trembled slightly, not from fear or exhaustion, but from the sheer intensity of the moment she had just created. She took a deep breath, trying to absorb the reality of what had just happened. For years she had felt invisible, overlooked and underestimated, working quietly behind counters and tables while her own life seemed to slip by unnoticed. But tonight, she had reclaimed a piece of herself, and in doing so, she had touched the hearts of everyone in the room. Asterisk.